Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive into the day's current affairs. I know you're all busy prepping for the UPSC exams, so we're going to make this quick but thorough.
Yeah, hit those highlights.
Right to the point.
Exactly. So think of this as like your daily dose of need-to-know info.
A little bit of everything today,
Yeah.
a little bit of governance, some education, even a bit of science and international news.
Oh, and we even have a newly discovered plant species in India we'll talk about.
Ooh, that's cool. I love when we talk about nature.
Yeah, and maybe even a thing or two about emergency landings.
Emergency landings. Okay, this is going to be interesting.
Definitely. All right, should we jump right in?
Let's do it. Let's kick things off with governance and schemes. Always a hot topic for the UPSC, right?
Oh, absolutely. And a good place to start is with the National E-Governance Awards Scheme.
Okay, so for those of you who may not be familiar,
Yeah.
this scheme is all about recognizing those initiatives that are using technology to kind of like transform how our government interacts with citizens.
It's about making things more efficient, transparent, accessible,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's super relevant because the guidelines for the 28th edition were just released.
So it's definitely on the UPSC radar.
Definitely keep this one on your radar, folks. And you know what I think is interesting? There's 6 award categories, but 2 of them really stand out as potential essay topics. We're talking digital transformation and cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah, those are juicy topics.
Right. I mean, think about it. How do these themes connect to issues of transparency, citizen engagement, even national security?
These are the kind of connections you want to be making for the UPSC examiners.
Exactly. Show them you can think critically and connect the dots. Okay, let's move on to education. The UDays Plus report for 2023-24 just dropped, and there's a pretty surprising finding.
Ooh, what's that?
Student enrollment is down.
Down.
Yeah, way down. Over a crore less than the previous year.
Wow, that's a huge drop. What could be causing that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the report offers some clues. It dives into gender disparities, minority representation, and the availability of basic amenities versus, those more advanced facilities in schools. It's a lot to unpack.
Definitely. But as a UPSC aspirant, you need to be able to analyze these factors and their impact on education.
Exactly. It's like detective work. You've got all these pieces of information: declining enrollment, infrastructure gaps, socioeconomic factors, and you've got to figure out how they all fit together to form that comprehensive understanding of India's education landscape.
Precisely. And don't forget to ask yourself those bigger questions too. Why does this decline matter? What are the long-term consequences for India's development?
Those are the kind of questions that can really impress the UPSC examiners.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the Central Groundwater Board, the CGWB.
Ah, yes, the CGWB. Now, this organization plays a crucial role in managing India's groundwater resources. And this is a biggie for the UPSC exam. You should definitely be prepared to answer questions about water management policies, the challenges, the solutions, the whole shebang.
For sure. And speaking of challenges, the CGWB's latest report shows that the number of districts with excessive nitrates in groundwater has increased sharply.
This is a serious issue, folks. From 359 districts in 2017 to 440 in 2023.
That's a significant jump. And, high nitrate levels can be harmful to human health.
Especially for infants.
Right. It can also affect agricultural productivity, which impacts food security and the economy. This data really highlights the need for sustainable water management practices.
Couldn't agree more. Now, while we're on the topic of groundwater, let's quickly define a term that you're bound to come across during your UPSC prep. What exactly is an aquifer?
Okay, so imagine a giant underground reservoir of water held within permeable rock or sediment. That's your aquifer. It's accessible through wells and springs, but it's vulnerable to contamination if it's not managed carefully.
Okay, so connecting this back to the CGWB's findings, the increase in nitrate levels suggests our aquifers are under stress, probably because of agricultural runoff and improper waste disposal.
Exactly. It all ties together.
It does. And it brings us to another important topic, the nutrient-based subsidy scheme.
The NBS scheme.
Or NBS for short. Now, this is directly related to the news about DAP fertilizer packages.
Right. The NBS scheme aims to make these essential fertilizers more affordable for farmers by providing subsidies. The subsidy amount is decided every year, taking into account international market prices for both the finished fertilizers and their raw materials.
And here's a key takeaway for all you future bureaucrats out there. An interministerial committee is involved in deciding the subsidy amount. This shows how different parts of the government work together to tackle these complex issues.
A great example of interministerial collaboration.
Something you might want to mention in your UPSC answers. Now let's switch gears and explore something a bit more.
Wow.
green.
Ooh, are we talking about the new plant species?
You bet. A brand new plant species has been discovered in the eastern Himalayas.
How exciting. What's it called?
It's called Stellaria bengalensis. It's a small herb found growing on those muddy slopes at high altitudes.
Sounds beautiful.
It is. But here's the thing. It's currently classified as data deficient by the IUCN.
Data deficient.
Yeah, it means we need more research to understand its distribution, population size, potential threats.
Makes sense.
It really highlights the need for ongoing scientific exploration and biodiversity conservation efforts.
Totally agree. Okay, ready for another adventure?
Always.
Let's head south to Kerala. Specifically, the Shendurney Wildlife Sanctuary. A recent faunal survey there added even more species to its already impressive list of inhabitants.
For those of you who might not know, Shendurney is this beautiful sanctuary nestled in the southern Western Ghats.
It's part of the Agasamalai Biosphere Reserve.
Definitely a potential question for the exam. Remember that one. Anyway, Shendurney is known for its diverse terrain and its incredible biodiversity. You can find everything there, from elephants and tigers to over 200 bird species.
It's a treasure trove of biodiversity. Oh, and did you know? The sanctuary's name, Shendurney, actually comes from a tree species.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Gluta travancoricum, but it's known locally as chinkurungi. And guess what? It's endemic to this region, meaning it's found nowhere else in the world.
Wow, that's fascinating. You know, those little nuggets of information can really help you stand out in the UPSC interview.
Exactly. Okay, let's switch gears one more time and delve into a recent development in healthcare that could help millions of people suffering from tinnitus.
Tinnitus?
Yeah, that ringing or buzzing in the ears.
Oh, right. So what's this new development?
Well, researchers have developed an affordable device for diagnosing and managing tinnitus.
That's huge. Tinnitus can really impact someone's quality of life, so having an affordable way to manage it is a big step forward.
Absolutely. This device uses advanced technology to match the specific sound a patient is experiencing, leading to more personalized treatment plans.
And the fact that it's affordable makes it accessible to a wider population.
Which is crucial in a country like India. And, this connects back to what we discussed earlier about the UDACE Plus report.
Oh, you mean how we need to analyze the social and economic implications of these issues?
Exactly. Think about the impact of tinnitus on mental health, productivity, overall well-being.
It's not just a medical issue.
Yeah.
It really does have broader societal ramifications.
For sure. Okay, ready for our final stop on this whirlwind tour of current affairs?
Bring it on.
Let's talk about a recent incident that involved a rather unusual landing technique.
You mean the belly landing?
That's the one, also known as a gear-up landing.
A belly landing is a pretty risky maneuver. It's what pilots do when the landing gear fails to deploy.
Usually because of a mechanical issue.
Right, and unfortunately, a Jeju air flight in South Korea had to execute a belly landing recently. It resulted in some fatalities.
Yeah, it was a tragic incident.
It was. Now, even though this happened outside India, the terminology is something you should definitely be familiar with for the UPSC.
Absolutely. Imagine being asked the difference between a belly landing and ditching in your interview.
Ditching.
Yeah, it's an emergency landing on water.
Oh, I see. Okay, so belly landing is on land, dishing is on water. Got it.
Exactly. And while we're at it, there are other aviation terms you might come across, like landing long and fast, touching down way beyond the designated zone on the runway, and at a higher speed than recommended.
Okay. Understanding these nuances shows you're paying attention to the details, which is important for the UPSC.
For sure. Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, we need to talk about one more thing.
What's that?
The Tobacco Board of India.
Now, this might surprise some of you, but India is actually the second largest producer of tobacco globally.
Only after China. The Tobacco Board oversees the production, distribution, and export of tobacco, particularly flue-cured Virginia tobacco.
And they've been pretty busy recently with all sorts of activities to support the industry.
Yeah, they've been working hard.
They have. So here's a question for you all to ponder.
Ooh, I love these thought-provoking questions.
How do we balance the economic significance of the tobacco industry? It provides livelihoods to many with its negative health effects. It's a tough question, right?
It is. It's that classic tension between economic growth and public health.
Something that comes up a lot in the UPSC exam.
Yeah.
And it's not just a domestic concern either. India faces pressure from international health organizations to reduce tobacco consumption.
So you've got all these different factors to consider, the economics, the health implications, the international pressure.
It's complex, But hey, that's what makes studying for the UTSC so interesting, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in part one, right?
We have.
Yeah,
But like you said before, it's not just about knowing the facts. It's about, connecting them, analyzing them, really understanding the bigger picture.
exactly. And that's what we're going to do now in part two.
Love it. So where should we start?
Let's take the UDS Plus report as an example. The drop in student enrollment is obviously a big deal, but the UPSC could ask you to take it a step further. How does this trend affect India's future workforce? What does it mean for achieving the demographic dividend? Think about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. We need to connect education with demographics and economic growth.
Right.
It's all about seeing those ripple effects.
Exactly. And think about the social implications, too. Could this decline in enrollment lead to, even wider inequalities based on gender or socioeconomic background?
That's a really important point,
Yeah.
and something that policymakers definitely need to consider.
Right. They need to be thinking about how to create a more equitable education system for everyone. And this is the kind of critical thinking that the UPSC is looking for.
Okay, so moving on. Let's revisit that issue of rising nitrate levels in groundwater. We talked about how it's a big environmental problem, but it goes beyond that, right?
Oh, absolutely. It directly impacts public health and agricultural productivity. It's a multifaceted issue.
Right. So high nitrate levels in drinking water can lead to all sorts of health problems like methemoglobinemia,
Yeah.
which is also sometimes called blue baby syndrome.
Yeah, and that's especially dangerous for infants.
Exactly. And then from an agricultural perspective, high nitrate levels can really hinder plant growth and reduce those crop yields.
Which obviously has major implications for food security and the economy. It's a chain reaction.
It is. So what can be done? What are some potential solutions?
Yeah.
Because, that's something that could definitely come up in the UPSC exam.
For sure. Well, the CGWB report itself actually offers some solutions. They really emphasize sustainable groundwater management. So things like promoting rainwater harvesting, regulating those nitrogen-based fertilizers, and ensuring proper waste disposal.
Those are all great starting points.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of solution-oriented thinking that the UPSC examiners love to see.
Right. It shows that you're not just aware of the problems, but you're also thinking about ways to address them.
Exactly. And, this actually ties back to the MBS scheme. We were talking about how it subsidizes P&K fertilizers.
Yeah.
And by doing that, the government is kind of encouraging farmers to use a more balanced mix of nutrients.
Exactly. Which could potentially reduce the overuse of nitrogen-based fertilizers and, in turn, reduce that nitrate leaching into the groundwater.
It's like a domino effect, but
Yes.
in a good way. It shows how government policies, even those focused on economic objectives, can have far-reaching effects on the environment and public health.
It's all connected.
It is. It's like we're piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle of India's current affairs and understanding how each piece connects to the whole.
I like that analogy. Now, imagine you're sitting in the UPSC interview, and the panel throws you a curveball. They ask you, how does the discovery of a new plant species in the eastern Himalayas relate to India's commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity? What would you say?
Ooh, that's a tough one. But I think I see the connection. The discovery of Stellaria bengalensis really highlights the incredible biodiversity of the Himalayas, which is a global biodiversity hotspot. And as a signatory to the convention, India has committed to protecting that biodiversity and ensuring its sustainable use.
Exactly. Even a seemingly small news item about a new plant can link back to India's international obligations and its role in global conservation efforts. It's all about making those connections.
It is. It's about showing that you have a broad perspective and you can see the bigger picture. And these deep dives are so helpful for developing those critical thinking skills.
Right. It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about recognizing patterns, connecting the dots, understanding the significance of the news.
Okay, so let's talk about that belly landing incident. It might seem like a purely technical issue, but it can be linked to broader issues of air safety regulations, pilot training, the role of the DGCA in India.
Absolutely. The UPSC could ask you to analyze the causes of such incidents and propose ways to improve air safety in India. That's where your knowledge of organizations like the DGCA, their responsibilities, their accident investigation procedures, all of that becomes super important.
Right. It's about showing that you understand the systems behind these events, not just the events themselves.
Exactly. And don't forget about the human element. Belly landings often result from split-second decisions made by pilots under immense pressure.
That's true. It must be incredibly stressful.
It is. So this highlights the importance of rigorous pilot training, emergency preparedness, and even the psychological aspects of, handling those high-stress situations.
It's a reminder that even in our increasingly technological world, those human factors are still crucial.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, lastly, let's revisit the Tobacco Board of India. It might seem like just another regulatory body, but its activities have major implications.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're talking about implications for the Indian economy, public health, even international trade.
Exactly. Remember, India is a major player in the global tobacco market, and the Tobacco Board is right at the center of it all. They're promoting exports, supporting farmers, regulating the industry. It's a big job.
It is. But there's a tension there, right? I mean, tobacco is a major source of revenue and employment for a lot of people, but it's also a huge health hazard.
Right. It contributes to so many diseases and puts a strain on our healthcare system.
So it's this dilemma, the economic benefits versus the health costs that often comes up in the UPSC exam.
Absolutely. They want to see if you can consider both sides of the issue, weigh the arguments, and articulate a well-reasoned opinion. It's a classic UPSC challenge.
It is. And don't forget about the international dimension.
Oh, right. India faces pressure from global health organizations to reduce tobacco consumption and implement stricter regulations.
So that adds another layer of complexity.
It does. But these are the kind of multidimensional challenges that the UPSC loves to test.
They want to see you think critically, connect the dots, develop that comprehensive understanding.
It's not about memorizing facts. It's about showcasing your ability to analyze, synthesize, form your own informed opinions.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing here today. Okay, future policymakers, we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've covered a ton of ground today, from governance and education to science, and even a bit of international news. Now, let's talk about how you can apply all of this to your UPSC prep.
Exactly. Because remember, the UPSC exam isn't just about knowing the facts. It's about analyzing information, connecting ideas, thinking critically. It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Right, exactly. So let's go back to some of the topics we discussed and think about those so what questions that can really demonstrate a deeper understanding.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so first up, the National E-Governance Award Scheme. How could you turn this into a potential essay question for the UPSC?
Well, imagine you encounter a question like, assess the role of e-governance in promoting transparency and accountability in India's public service delivery. Or maybe, discuss the challenges and opportunities of leveraging AI and emerging technologies for citizen-centric services. Those are the kind of prompts that really make you think.
Right. It's not enough to just define e-governance or list out those award categories. You really need to dig deep. Think about its impact on governance, the potential pitfalls, how it all aligns with those broader national development goals.
Exactly. Okay, now let's go back to the UDays Plus report. The decline in student enrollment is a pretty major trend. The UPSC might ask you to analyze its long-term consequences. How could this affect India's demographic dividend? What are the implications for the future workforce?
Yeah, those are big questions. It's about connecting those education trends with demographics and economic growth.
Right. And don't forget those social implications. Could this decline worsen those existing inequalities, especially along gender and socioeconomic lines? Policymakers need to think about these things when they're trying to create a more inclusive and equitable education system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, let's revisit the issue of rising nitrate levels in groundwater. This could easily become an ethics question in the UPSC exam. How do we balance the need for agricultural production with the need to protect public health and the environment?
That's a tough one. There's no simple answer, right? But the UPSC is looking for your ability to present a balanced and nuanced perspective. You could argue for stricter regulations on fertilizer use, but also acknowledge those potential economic impacts on farmers. It's about showing you can think critically about complex issues.
Right, exactly. Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's think about that new plant species discovered in the eastern Himalayas. It might seem like a small news item, but the UPSC could use this to test your broader understanding of environmental concepts. Think about the importance of biodiversity conservation in the face of climate change, or the challenges of protecting fragile ecosystems like the Himalayas.
It's all about making those connections, showing you can think critically about those larger environmental issues.
Okay, last but not least, let's consider the belly landing incident. Again, it might seem purely technical, but the UPSC could use this to evaluate your understanding of aviation safety regulations, crisis management, even international cooperation in those accident investigations.
You could even be asked to propose measures to improve air safety in India, drawing from global best practices. The UPSC wants to see you can think beyond national boundaries.
So as you can see, even those seemingly isolated current affairs can be connected to a whole web of knowledge and insights that are relevant to the UPSC exam.
Huh.
It's about going beyond the headlines, analyzing those underlying issues, connecting the dots.
Exactly. The UPSC exam isn't just about what you know, it's about how you think. So develop that analytical mindset, stay curious, and never stop connecting those dots.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your fellow UPSC aspirants. We'll be back soon with another deep dive to help you ace those exams. Until then, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep striving for excellence.